Hello, everyone. Um, we're back in South Africa today. Um, to give you an idea how big South Africa is, if you took the United Kingdom, this country will probably go about 3 times into South Africa. It's a vast area of land, a big country. Its population is slightly less than in the UK. Presently, there is an estimated close to 60 million people, whereas in the UK, it's about 68 million people. So you can imagine how big that is. Now, the area I grew up in, Soweto, today it's estimated to have a population of about 1.8 million people. I don't know how factual those statistics are because there are people who live in shacks in the area who may not be even, in the statistics calculated because there are people from all over the world who get into that country and manage to survive. Anyway, when I grew up, in order to survive when you were still in school, you needed to be having some kind of manual job you did. The first one I was introduced to was going out into the city on Saturday afternoons. You go out and spend the evening selling newspapers, Sunday Times, Sunday Express, to white folks, who'd be going out for dinners, to be going out to the movies, and even, nightclubs and things. Going into the city, you take a train that will take you about 40 minutes, stopping all over en route into the city. And Saturday afternoons, it won't be as packed, whereas in the week, in the mornings in particular, and in the afternoons, those trains were too packed, overflowing to a point whereby some people would be hanging, by the doors outside, others holding on through the windows, up to the next station and so on. Quite risky. There used to be also staff riders, people who can climb and go and risk their lives right up on the roof on top, where these high electrified cables. But because they are quite risky, they'd want to showcase their skills, in so doing. And then in these trains, when you went in, even in the afternoons on the Saturdays, you'd find in some coaches there'd be young men, cuddled around a corner, forming a ring, others kneeling, others standing, and all that would be happening in that corner would be playing dice, gambling. And that was fraught with danger. And you're advised not even to be in that particular coach because with all good intentions, people who gamble there, the range of tempers flare, when they start losing. And in the majority of times, you'll find there won't be one or two knives amongst those people. Probably, the majority of them would be having some form of weapon in their pockets. And it happened quite often that there'd be stabbings, someone would lose a temper because they've lost money, and then would just fight the person who is controlling that scenario. And besides that, there'd be people who will come in, to the coach, selling their merchandise, things like cigarettes, crisps, peanuts, snacks, and would move on from coach to coach doing this. But also, there'd be occasions when just a group of young men would enter the coach with the intention of mugging people, and they could just close off the whole coach from one station to the next, and they'd be searching, and no one would dare say anything. I mean, because they'd always be armed, they'd be flashing their knives. Those knives were called at the time okapis, and they were very, very dangerous. But anyway, we survived all that. You'd get to the newspaper place, offices and stuff. There'd be lots of others from different areas. And then you'd be deployed into some corner, of the city with your bundle of newspapers. And you spend the evening from about 10 o'clock till about 3 o'clock in the morning selling these newspapers. Then it'd be collected again, taken back. But my last straw in that sort of situation was when one of the young men who were there simply disappeared. We didn't know him personally, but we heard that so and so, hasn't come back, and then you'd never know what demise fallen that person, because there was a lot of racism, young white men or couples who come by to buy the newspapers and things, will be quite abusive, you know. And then depending on your strength, emotionally and otherwise, you have to like be tolerant of that situation. They'll buy your newspaper and then leave. But the majority of them will just show you their, hatred of you, and be abusive. And yeah, that was the sort of situation. But then I upgraded from doing that sort of exercise of getting pocket money. I found a job to work at IBM, which is International Business Machines. It's an American company. I used to collate, all these spreadsheets, papers that had to do with salaries for other companies. So when you collate, you are putting them in some specific order, and that was quite boring. I didn't survive too long on that also. Moved on to ICL, International Computer Limited, also an American company, computer company. There I was taught to become a machine operator. It was more computing, doing records of wages, using these cards. And these were these big machines at the time, not smaller computers like what we've got. They were mainframes, very, very big machines with huge rollers and stuff. Yeah, even there, I survived a few months. And because at some point, I was sent a message to be told not to come back. But what had happened is somebody had rung up the firm and told them there was some explosive planted somewhere in the building. So the area had to be cordoned off, people sent home and things. But because my family, my sister in particular, had been in detention, I was the main suspect. So they didn't need a character like me, in that company. So they sent a message, they didn't want me. The next one that I tried was an oil refinery in Durban. There I made a mistake of going for an interview, driving a car, and the people who were going to interview me saw me parking the car, coming in, speaking to them, coming in for the interview. And as I was parking the car, I think they decided we're not going to take this one. He doesn't need the job. And that was simply because I was driving a car, and probably some of them didn't even have transport at the time. I don't know. But I never got the job. And in between, we are trying to study, enrolled at the University of KwaZulu-Natal at Ongoye. Did some 2-year stint, studying a Bachelor of Science degree. But then even that got engulfed in politics. I remember we had, the admin building burned by students, etc. And when I left that institution, actually, I had to live with some people who lived around KZN, taking them to Johannesburg because they wanted to leave the country. And at that time, we're approaching the period of it was 1975 to 1976, when we had these big student uprisings in Soweto in particular, which then even spread to other cities around the country. So there was a lot of recruitment that was happening, for the liberation movements that were based outside the country. I had a friend called Inch Hwaka, another called Briggs Manye, another called Nzima, Tom Nobanda. We grew up together with these guys. Tom in particular and Briggs were well known because of their jiving skills. Tom used to like dancing, doing this, what was it called? Cha-cha-cha. With Briggs, it was monkey jiving and stuff, and he was really good at it. And then we had an older person who was a friend of ours called Carl Rabuto. He was about probably 8-10 years older than me. He used to pick us up. He used to work for the Delmas company. It was a milling company. So every Friday they'd be filling up their sales cars. And then we'd have petrol throughout the weekend. And through him, we younger ones got to know the neighboring countries like Lesotho, Botswana, Swaziland. It would not be a big deal going to those countries, for the weekend, coming back, Yeah, and then in the midst of doing this recruitment, because when it approached 1976, lots of people wanted to leave the country. And then it became worse when students were shot. And then by that time, some of us had little training on light armaments, how to hold a pistol. In fact, me and Tom already had our own pistol. We're not very accurate in shooting, but we did teach ourselves, with the theoretical work that had been done on us in Swaziland. Besides that, we didn't really have. But then Inch, because he was the main character, would be virtually be involved in every trip taking people out of the country. Either me or Tom or Briggs would only accompany him, when he needed company, yes. But people had got to know that we're taking people out. There'd be people coming from other areas seeking to leave the country, and then we'd make that possible for that to happen to them. And then Inch came with three guys, in fact, to me at one time. And these 2-3 people One of them was Tokyo Sekwale, the other was Ntsiki, the other was Slylo um, Ramusi. So Inch introduced them to me, but then at the time, these three guys needed accommodation. So I negotiated with my mother. I mean, we knew they were armed, etc., but my mother willingly didn't mind having them in the house, but on condition that we stayed in the house in the day. She'll organize things like food, anything that we need outside there, but in the day we should be in the house. And it was on those conditions that Tokyo and Slayelo could live at my home, in Orlando West. So they stayed there close to 2 weeks. They were there with the curtains shut in the day. And then we'd go out at night, there were activities of meeting other people, etc. And the main thing they were interested in, is mobilizing units, training them on light armaments, how to use certain weapons, organizing things like sabotage, like railway stations, hitting a railway line, with explosives and things, just sabotage generally. Yeah, and then as time went on, at some point I was asked to rent a car because there needed to be a trip going to Swaziland. And Inch was going to use that car to go to Swaziland. And then I rented this car through Hertz, if I remember. And it was in my original, identity documents and stuff. And it was handed over to Inch, and then Inch went to Swaziland. Days went by, Inch didn't come back. Time went by, the timeline that he was expected to be back in, he didn't surface. Until at some point, Tokyo Sekwale and Slyelo decided, and Sigi decided that me and Slyelo, we should go to Swaziland to see what could have happened with Inch. So Carl readily, offered to transport us to the border where we were going to cross over into Swaziland. And then crossing over, I mean, you couldn't use, the passports that generally you'd have, as a citizen of the country. It was just too risky. And then, I mean, people like Slyelo by that time were fully armed cadres of the ANC. They come back from training. Tokyo had trained in the Soviet Union. Slyelo told me he had trained at the GDR, which was East Germany at the time. So we went, Carl dropped us off at the border. We crossed over into Swaziland, only to find that in Manzini, when we met, Moses Mapida was the main, leader of the South African Communist Party there. And Stan Mabizela was the chief rep of the ANC at the time. Only for Moses Mabida to tell us that Norman Inchwaka left like 2 weeks before, coming back to South Africa. Only then we realized that something has happened to Inch. And then Moses Mapida was quick to instruct that one of us will need to go back in the country to report that, to the units, to the cadres that had been sent in. And if they are not arrested, they will need to all come out abandon everything that they were supposed to be doing in the country. And then I was allocated that task. A car was rented, with a driver that was going to take me into South Africa. And of course, I also had to cross through the green border, not through the official gate, and the person met me the other side. And we went to Johannesburg. Now, my first thought was I had this big surf, package. Surf was cloth washing powder. It was the biggest you could find in the market. But inside it was stashed, with money. But at face value, when you saw that, you think, oh, I just bought soap, and not think much about it. Whereas inside it was money, that was to be given to the comrades, if they were still surviving inside. So my first thought was to go find ways of how I could go into the areas and the houses that I knew they possibly could be at, be it in Soweto and in Alexandria Township. But then I decided I'll go and fetch some ladies, Mena and O'Hara, who were just in the neighborhood around where we lived, were friends with them. And I thought them being ladies, they'd easily be able to enter these houses, especially around Alexandra, to be able to size up whether anything has happened to the comrades or not. So they agreed to go with me, and with this guy who was driving the car. We started in Alexandra, and true enough, the first place we went to, I had to drop them off, some streets away from the avenue of the houses that I knew we used to occupy. You know, give them direction of which house it is and stuff. But before they even reached those houses, people in the area were talking about the incidences that had happened in the area. It was quite tense. So they were quickly told that there were raids. They didn't even need to enter the yards of these houses that would come to look for the comrades. They were told not even to attempt to go in there because they are being watched. So, but they got information that number of our cadres had been arrested. And that is how we got to know that Tokyo and them, there'd been massive swoops, people had been arrested. And then we left, went to a couple of more houses around Soweto. It was still the same situation. No one had been spared. And then when we went to Carl's home, it was the same thing. Carl's wife, Auskidi, just told us that no, Carl has been taken by the police, and they don't know whether they are still alive or not. The families don't know whether they are still alive or not. So the last stop I needed to do before I dropped off, now I went to drop off Mina and O'Hara first. Then I decided I'll go home and see my mother and just bid her farewell because I was going to be going, and I didn't know how long for. And we parked the car a few houses away from home, and I walked in. When I knocked, and my mother opened it, she just told me, she looked frightened. She just said, "My son, don't even come in. They've been here a number of times looking for you. I would rather I know you to be alive. Just leave this country. At least I'll know you're alive, because I know." And they did say that if they capture you, you're dead. And that was the last time I saw my mother. That was January 1977. And then she passed away, and my dad also passed away, both of them in 1992. So all those years from 1992 to 1977, I'd never seen my mother. Now, when we talk of persecution, I mean, you think of, for instance, with my mother's case, she had already lost her daughter. My sister had left the country some months before, soon after a detention. She had come out from detention, was house arrested. She was not allowed to have more than two people at one time, even within the family members. So there was, no hope for her to be around for anything. So she left the country. Now, when you think of persecution and the trauma, it's not just the victim that gets affected, their next of kin, the people in the neighborhood, friends that know you, they all get affected by what happens to you. So that was the sort of situation. So in my mother's case, I mean, can you imagine two of your children, they've left the country, but you don't know how safe they are. But in your mind, you feel better knowing that they are not within bars or have been killed. But lots of other parents have had worse demises than that. Inch, who got arrested at the border post, whom I've mentioned, his mother, they took him to his home. He was covered in a blanket. There were two holes for him, to be able to see. The mother, when she pulled that blanket from his body, she couldn't even recognize him. But the police quickly covered him again. And they wanted him to pinpoint, where he had dug in whatever materials they were looking for. And they dug at that yard looking for weapons and explosives and whatever they thought Inch had. And in the newspapers that came out, yes, they claimed to have found, a cache of arms at his home. Carl Rabuto, when they took him, when he came out of that prison, from that detention, he couldn't find a job. Every job he tried finding, the special branch would go there and tell them he's a terrorist. They shouldn't employ him. And then he'll get fired. Tokyo Sekwale and Sigi and them ended up being charged. I think Tokyo served something like, he was sentenced to something like 17 years in Robben Island. But I don't think he served all that, because around just approaching the release of Mandela, etc., there were negotiations, and some of them became people who got released. Yes, today that was the story I wanted to relate. And we'll take it up from then the next time. And then if you like what you hear, and do please subscribe and share. And also you can reach out on footprintforchange@gmail.com. Thank you. Bye.